On the morning of June 18th, 2021, deputies responded to a farmhouse in Traer, Iowa, where a woman named Karina Cooper was screaming that someone had broken in and shot her husband. When they arrived, she was sitting on top of his body, clinging to him and sobbing. She said she heard a noise, walked into the living room, and found him covered in blood. And she said she had no idea who could have done this. But investigators were already hearing a name, a local man named Huston Danker, a 22-year-old who both Karina and Huston insisted was nothing more than a friend. What detectives eventually uncovered was a trail of deleted Snapchat messages, a $500,000 life insurance policy, and a conspiracy that had been apparently going on for years. Ryan Cooper was 42 years old, and he had 3 kids asleep upstairs when he was killed. This is the full story. Subscribe now to hear more stories like this.
It was the morning of June 18th, 2021, and the sun hadn't even begun to rise over the quiet farmland surrounding Traer, Iowa. Just after 4:30 a.m., a frantic call came into the Tama County Sheriff's Office. On the other end of the line was 48-year-old Karina Cooper screaming that something had happened to her husband. Dispatchers struggled to gather information as Karina cried into the phone, and even after law enforcement arrived, investigators would later say that she remained almost inconsolably distraught. She repeatedly expressed fear that someone else might still be inside the home, and she was especially worried because her children were still in there. The first deputy reached the property at approximately 4:42 a.m., just 7 minutes after the call came in. Upon walking into the residence, he found 42-year-old Ryan Cooper slumped in a recliner in the living room. At first glance, it appeared he had suffered a gunshot wound to the face. Karina was sitting on top of him when they arrived. As first responders moved through the home, Karina and the couple's 3 children were escorted outside while emergency personnel and investigators secured the scene. One investigator would later testify that when they found her, she was hugging Ryan's body and rubbing her face against his, desperately clinging on to him. But sadly, there was nothing anyone could do. The medical examiner was summoned to the residence, and Ryan was pronounced dead at the scene. As crime scene investigators began processing the farmhouse, they quickly realized this wasn't just a single gunshot. Ryan had actually been shot twice in the face, and forensic evidence indicated that at least one of those shots was fired from close range. Investigators located a single .22 caliber shell casing near the scene, but despite thoroughly searching the residence, they couldn't find a firearm anywhere in the immediate area around Ryan's body.
Evidence from throughout the home was carefully documented and collected by the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigations crime scene team before being transported to the state laboratory in Ankeny for analysis. Later that same day, an autopsy performed by the Iowa Office of the State Medical Examiner officially ruled Ryan's death a homicide, listing the cause of death as 2 gunshot wounds to the head. The Cooper residence remained an active crime scene until the evening of June 19th, as investigators continued documenting every inch of the property. Even in those earliest hours, the physical evidence raised troubling questions. A shell casing was present, but there was no weapon. Ryan had been shot twice in the face, and whatever had happened inside that farmhouse didn't appear consistent with an accident or a suicide. Someone had intentionally killed him. The mystery, however, was really only just beginning. Before detectives had even finished processing the crime scene, whispers were already circulating through the small community of Traer. Rumors spread with astonishing speed, and there was this one name that just kept finding its way back to investigators, and that was the name of Huston Danker. Now, this town has a population of around 1,500 people, so everyone really seems to know everyone else. It's this quiet railroad town in Tama, Iowa, that's located roughly 24 miles north of Cedar Falls. And news travels fast there, but gossip travels even faster. And that was especially true on June 18th, 2021. Long before investigators had pieced together what happened inside the Cooper home, rumors were already making the rounds about a possible relationship between Karina Cooper and this local man named Huston Danker. Detectives heard these rumors almost immediately, which made Huston one of the first people they wanted to speak with.
Karina was brought to the police station for questioning later that same morning. As she walked investigators through the previous evening, she explained that her young daughter had been unusually fussy between about 10 p.m. and midnight. According to Karina, she stayed awake reading to her until the child finally settled down, and at that time she went to bed herself sometime close to midnight. She said that she naturally awoke around 3 a.m., and she described this as her usual time that she always would wake up. But eventually she fell back asleep. And at this point, she said she fell into a hard sleep. And then she heard a loud noise. Karina described this noise as sounding like something had crashed in the kitchen or maybe fallen over. And she compared it to a sound that she had heard just a few days before when a wire shower rack fell over. She got out of bed and peeked into the living room just to check things out, and Ryan was in his recliner with a blanket draped across his chest. At first glance, she said she thought he was just asleep. And in fact, she even insisted that she heard him snore at that point while she was standing there in the kitchen. So rather than waking him immediately, Karina said that she walked into the kitchen and looked out the window toward the driveway to see whether anyone was outside, and she didn't see anything unusual. But eventually, she turned on a table lamp in the living room and approached Ryan, and that's when she realized there was actually blood everywhere. She told investigators she immediately started screaming, shaking him, hitting him in the chest, and yelling directly into his face in an attempt to wake him. When detectives asked whether she heard anyone leaving the property, heard a vehicle speeding away, any doors slamming, or footsteps outside the house, Karina said she hadn't heard any of those things. But she worried that an intruder could still be inside, so she gathered her kids into her bedroom and instructed them to lock the door. She then called Ryan's brother Aaron and asked him to come over. While she was waiting for Aaron to arrive, Karina said she attempted to access a small handgun safe that she kept in her closet by using the fingerprint scanner on the safe, but she said that she wasn't able to get it open. And we're going to get into more of the story after a quick break to hear a word from this week's sponsors.
Now back to the episode. So before the break, Karina Cooper has started to walk investigators through that morning where she discovered her husband's body, but detectives were already hearing rumors about another man, and they were just beginning to dig into that relationship. So the conversation between the detective and with Karina eventually shifts to the marriage with Ryan. And at first, Karina describes the relationship as being perfectly normal and even said that things between her and Ryan were better than they had been in a while. I feel like we hear this a lot in any kind of like spousal murder. It's like, you know what? We were fighting for months, and then the last week we had the best time. Last night,
Right.
best date night ever. And you're like, oh, okay.
Right.
And she told detectives at this time that they were making plans together for the future. And as the questioning continues, she does acknowledge that they had experienced a rough patch after Ryan's mother died about a year earlier. She characterized their problems as stemming from grief and poor communication, not from infidelity, and she firmly denied having an affair. Investigators then brought up the name that had already been circulating throughout town, and of course, that's the name of Huston Danker. Karina initially described him as nothing more than a friend and a former customer at this barbershop and salon that she operated from an outbuilding on the family's property. As detectives are talking to Karina, they're, going through the information they do have, and they mentioned to her that there was this Snapchat message that her husband Ryan had reportedly seen, and in this message, it referenced a naked married woman. And Karina denies that, I don't know what that is about. This guy Huston has never seen me naked. She actually responded, no, God, no, and remarked that he was only 22 years old, making this suggestion like totally unbelievable in her mind. She insisted that this message that Ryan may have seen simply had been sent to her by mistake and was never intended for her at all. According to Karina, once Ryan became uncomfortable with her and Huston having a friendship, she intentionally distanced herself from him and she stopped cutting his hair. She claimed that the last time the two had socialized was the previous fall. She did acknowledge, though, occasionally watching Huston's children, explaining that because he was divorced, he sometimes had to work during the times he had custody of his kids. So she said there was like a handful of times where his regular babysitter wasn't available and she would watch the kids. As far as she was concerned, though, that was the entire explanation for the rumors. She said because people had seen Huston's truck parked outside her home while she was babysitting the kids, they must have just jumped to conclusions. And she dismissed the speculation as nothing more than this stupid town and their rumors.
Not long afterward, investigators sat down with Huston himself. They were very direct right from the get-go. Within an hour of Ryan's death, they told him that multiple people had already suggested that he and Karina were involved in an affair, and Huston immediately denied it. Instead, he described Karina as being like his gay best friend, which I'm
It
not
was
real
so
sure.
weird.
Yeah, and I'm like, what? I don't even like what does that even mean? Like in this context, what are you saying in
But
this
in this
context?
interrogation, that's the thing. He doesn't really say, I'm like her gay best friend or she's like my gay best friend. It's just like, oh, it's like a gay best friend. And you're like, but who is what in this conversation? Why does
Exactly.
that
Right. I'm like,
matter?
in this context, what does it mean?
If you would say, like, oh, she's like another one of my guy friends, that I could understand.
Different.
This is
Right.
like, what are you trying to say here?
Or like a sister to me or something like that. Like I just don't understand
Sister,
using
absolutely. Yeah, but this one is like, huh? I don't get what you're trying to prove here.
right. But he explained that as a divorced father of two young children, that he was often in difficult situations trying to balance work and parenting. And on roughly 3 occasions, according to Houston, he said he had found himself in a pinch and Karina was able to step in and watch his kids. But like Karina, he blamed the gossip on the realities of small town life. He said the same thing. People have seen my truck parked to her house and my kids there, and surely they just made assumptions based on that. So Houston explained that he had actually known the Cooper family practically his whole life. Everyone was from the same area, and their more regular interaction only began after he started getting his haircut at Karina's shop because it was just convenient for his work schedule. Eventually, investigators confronted him about those Snapchat messages. Houston admitted that they had started exchanging Snapchat messages around the same time Karina started occasionally helping with his kids, which very convenient.
Uh-huh.
According to him, they typically messaged only once or twice a week and would just send things like ordinary pictures, like a beer he took a picture of after work or some of his farm equipment. Just very, totally,
Yeah. Like a gay best
reasonable.
friend.
There you go. He also stated that he believed Ryan knew that they were communicating through Snapchat.
Houston then walks detectives through his own timeline for the night Ryan was killed. He says in this interrogation that he worked until about 6:30 or 7 that evening before, then he stopped for gas in Tirare and headed home where he lived by himself. At some point, he briefly looked at some farms in Cloutier before eventually going to bed sometime between 10:30 and 11:30 p.m. And as this interview draws to a close, investigators give him a glimpse into the tools that they have available. I will say this interrogation is really good. This guy absolutely thought the investigator was his friend during this. That's like how they spoke. But the investigator's just telling him, like, there's modern investigative techniques. So if you're not telling us the right thing, we've got stuff like geofencing technology. It's capable of identifying every phone that ever entered a designated area around a crime scene during a particular period of time. So don't worry, if you're not telling us what we need to know, it's okay. It's all in there, but almost in a way like we know you didn't because this will prove it, right? And they also warned him that deleted phone data and conversations, of course, could be recovered, even when people believe they had been erased forever, which I feel like is the entire thing of Snapchat.
I also just feel like in this time, like in this day and age, like this story happened in the 2020s. Okay. So it hasn't been that long, but are there genuinely still people out there that don't understand that the authorities can get anything that you've ever put on your phone? Like on any platform. If they want to find it, like they will absolutely find it if they have access to your phone. They can find your Snapchat messages. They can find any deleted messages that you think are not there anymore. But it blows my mind that people still don't understand that like any internet searches you make on your phone, like literally anything you do on your phone, it's all there. Like they can recover it, they can find it, and it will be used against you.
Yeah, for sure. And Snapchat is a big one. There is like an infamous clip now from some podcast where the comedian Chris D'Elia is sitting with these people and they're discussing Snapchat and they're like, yeah, and people think that these messages just go away after 24 hours. He's like, oh, they don't go away? And they're like, no, you can still, like, police could still get them if they wanted. And you just see his face, like, literally the blood leave his face. And he's like, oh. He later got in trouble for things he was sending to underage people. So you can imagine the shock he was in. But it really is like, I don't understand in this day and age how anything, like, I don't know. Technology is so crazy, but like even when people are like, you can't see somebody's likes. Yeah, if Facebook wants to show it, they will. Like everything is available, which is the thing we tell our kids. Everything on the internet is not safe. So, as they're telling Houston this, he really does remain very calm, and he tells detectives they're not going to find his phone anywhere near the Cooper residence during that time frame of the murder, so he really wasn't worried. And despite interviewing witnesses, collecting forensic evidence, and conducting countless follow-up leads, investigators were unable to make an arrest. And so, of course, the days turned to weeks, weeks turned into months, and then the months turned into years. For nearly 3 years, Ryan Cooper's murder remained unsolved. Behind the scenes, though, the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation continued working the case. Detectives kept reviewing evidence and examining digital records and following up on information that had been gathered in those first crucial hours after Ryan's death.
Finally, in early February of 2024, the investigation took a dramatic turn. On February 19th, 2024, authorities arrested Karina Cooper at her rural T-Rare home and charged her with first-degree murder. She was booked into the Tama County Jail and held on $1 million bond. Just over 2 months later, on April 29th, investigators arrested Huston Danker in Cedar Rapids. He was charged with first-degree murder as well, and he was accused of acting together with Karina in Ryan's killing. Like Karina, he was held on a $1 million bond. Although investigators hadn't publicly revealed everything they uncovered during their lengthy investigation, these dual arrests made one thing abundantly clear, and that was that authorities no longer believed Ryan Cooper had been killed by an unknown intruder. Instead, prosecutors alleged the murder had been the result of a conspiracy involving Ryan's own wife and the man both of them insisted was nothing more than a friend. Before either case reached trial, Houston's proceedings experienced a series of delays. His trial was originally scheduled to begin on November 4th, 2024, but the date was repeatedly pushed back. In December of that year, his attorney, Leon Spies, requested a continuance after receiving a 46-page report from a key prosecution expert just weeks before the anticipated trial. According to the defense, there simply wasn't enough time to properly review this report or consult with their own expert before the trial, and prosecutors did not oppose the request. Judge Lars Anderson ultimately rescheduled the proceedings for August 12th, 2025.
While Houston's case remained pending, prosecutors prepared to put Karina on trial first. And when that trial began in July of 2025, jurors were presented with the state's theory of what had motivated Ryan Cooper's murder. According to prosecutors, the motive came down to two things. The first was money, and the second was a future with someone else. The state alleged that Karina was struggling financially in those years leading up to Ryan's death. Evidence presented at trial showed that she frequently overdrafted her bank accounts to the point that a bank employee had repeatedly encouraged her to make deposits and keep the accounts in good standing. Prosecutors argued that divorce would not have provided Karina with meaningful financial security because many of Ryan's assets were tied up in the family's farming business. His death, however, was another matter entirely. Back in November of 2013, Ryan had purchased a $500,000 term life insurance policy and named Karina as his sole beneficiary. After he was killed on June 18, 2021, that policy paid out. On December 22nd of that year, almost 6 months after Ryan's murder, Karina received a check for over $500,000 and she later deposited the money. And we have so much more to get into with this story after a quick break to hear a word from this week's sponsors. And now back to the episode.
Before the break, nearly 3 years had passed without any arrests before investigators suddenly charged both Karina Cooper and Huston Danker with first-degree murder. And now prosecutors are about to reveal why they believe Ryan Cooper's death was motivated by far more than an affair. Prosecutors argued that finances were only part of the picture. Digital evidence recovered during the investigation suggested that by early 2021, Karina and Huston weren't simply just carrying on with their flirtatious behavior. They appeared to actually be planning an entirely new life together. According to the state, Karina referred to Ryan not as her husband, but merely as a spawner, which,
Yeah.
ew, that's so gross
So
to even say
gross.
about the father of your children. And at the same time, Huston was increasingly beginning to envision himself stepping into the role of the father of Karina's children. These two actually discussed having a child together the following year and specifically talked about pursuing in vitro fertilization because they believed they would have a hard time conceiving naturally. In one exchange from March of 2021, Karina vented to Huston after Ryan reacted negatively to one of their son's wrestling matches, and she contrasted Ryan's behavior with the supportive father figure that she imagined Huston would somehow become. She even told him, quote, "You can do anything you want with those boys. You're their daddy. Don't need mom's permission."
What?
Literally,
What?
what? So weird.
So weird.
To prosecutors, though, this message is very striking because it suggests that, at least in Karina's mind, Ryan has already been replaced with Huston. And these messages became even more disturbing. In another conversation from March of 2021, prosecutors allege that Karina texted Huston saying that she was wishing for a rogue semi-accident to take Ryan out because she couldn't wait another summer. So she's literally fantasizing about
Like
Ryan's
Final
death.
Destination. Yeah.
Right. And it's just very sick and disturbing.
Yeah.
If jurors did believe that that message reflected her genuine feelings rather than just a moment of anger or dark humor, it does paint a chilling picture of premeditation months before Ryan was ever shot.
By the time Karina took the witness stand in her own defense, jurors had already spent days hearing about these secret messages, financial problems, and a relationship that prosecutors insisted had evolved into a murder conspiracy. Now, for the first time, the jury and the rest of the world would hear directly from her. So when Karina was on the stand, she described her marriage to Ryan as good normal. Don't know exactly what that means, but I think basically just run-of-the-mill marriage. She explained that Ryan would work long hours as an hourly employee at Cooper Farms and that it wasn't unusual for him to sleep in a recliner in the living room instead of coming to bed. She testified that she operated her own barbershop and salon out of an outbuilding on the family property, and she also acknowledged during this time that she frequently did overdraft her bank accounts. According to Karina, this wasn't because she was secretly struggling financially, but because she was lazy or simply forgot to make deposits on time. She then addressed the topic everyone in the courtroom had been waiting for, and that was her relationship with Huston Danker. Karina testified that she first met Huston when he became a customer in her salon. Over time, their interactions expanded beyond haircut appointments and eventually developed into an online flirtation. She admitted that Huston gave her attention and compliments that she felt she wasn't receiving elsewhere, but she insisted that their relationship really existed mostly in a fantasy world. According to Karina, despite the romantic messages that had been recovered from their phones, it really wasn't real life. She described it as being simply an online fantasy. Karina acknowledged that there had been one physical encounter between the two in February of 2021, but testified that afterwards she felt disgusted by what had happened. She said she stopped cutting Huston's hair because she feared losing her husband and wanted to distance herself from him.
When prosecutors confronted Karina with messages where she had referred to Ryan as merely a sperm donor while calling Huston the true father of her children, Karina also attempted to explain that away and insisted those statements also didn't reflect reality. Likewise, when she was asked about the March 2021 message where she wrote that she was hoping for a rogue semi-accident with no survivors involving Ryan, she said that was nothing more than just inappropriate humor made in a moment of anger. Karina also testified that Huston himself had threatened to kill Ryan on several occasions, but she claimed that she never actually believed him. In her mind, he was simply telling tall tales and making these outrageous statements that she never expected him to act upon. So when we turn to the night of June 17th, Karina recounted what she said was an ordinary family evening. They attended a baseball game, they picked up a pizza afterward, and they got home around 8:20 p.m. Later that night, she said she was awakened by what she described as a loud crashing sound, which, as I mentioned before, she thought was a shower caddy falling over or something similar to what had happened at their house days earlier. She walked through the house, eventually reached the living room, and after turning on a lamp, discovered what she said was a large pool of blood surrounding her husband. One of the most closely scrutinized pieces of evidence involved a message exchanged with Huston at approximately 3:32 that morning. So jurors saw the evidence, and this message had said something along the lines of, "I have to get this done," and Karina responded with just one single word. All she said was, "Go." But of course, Karina disputed the interpretation of that as well. She testified that she actually had sent 3 separate messages, and you know how people will sometimes write like
I do
one
that.
word, send,
Mm-hmm.
one word, send, one word, send. So she was saying that they took it out of context, and what she really said was go to sleep in 3 separate messages, but that they were only pulling the go out of that and
Got
using that
it.
to frame it like she was telling him to go ahead and murder her husband. And she maintained that that exchange was completely innocent and had absolutely nothing to do with Ryan's murder.
Karina also continued to insist that shortly before discovering Ryan, she heard him snoring. In fact, she testified that while she was standing in the kitchen after hearing that crashing noise, she could have sworn that she heard a single snore coming from the living room. And that testimony stood in stark contrast to the prosecutor's theory that Ryan had already been dead for some time before she ever even called 911. She also admitted that she had failed to tell the investigators the full truth about Huston for nearly 2 years after the murder. Karina testified that she panicked because she believed that Huston was setting her up as part of one of his schemes. According to her testimony, for roughly a year and a half after Ryan's death, Huston continued sending threatening Snapchat messages suggesting that he was watching her and reminding her that he knew dangerous people. She claimed that these threats that he sent her left her terrified for both herself and for her children. The prosecution also questioned Karina about the more than $500,000 that she received from Ryan's life insurance policy. She acknowledged receiving the money, but she testified that she had not used it to build some kind of new life with Huston. Instead, she said she used part of it to pay off debts, including Ryan's truck loan and her own vehicle, and then she invested money in starting an embroidery business. The remaining balance, which amounted to approximately $368,000 according to her testimony, was placed into an investment portfolio for her children.
Throughout her testimony, Karina repeatedly denied orchestrating Ryan's murder. She told jurors she would never have planned to have her husband killed while her 3 children were asleep upstairs in the same house, and her attorneys really reinforced that argument throughout the trial. The defense maintained that Huston Danker and Huston Danker alone had killed Ryan Cooper. According to them, he had manipulated Karina, drawn her into this unrealistic online fantasy land, and ultimately acted on violent ideas that she never believed would become a reality. The flirtatious conversations about marriage, children, and IVF were characterized as nothing more than escapism. After all, the defense pointed out, Karina had previously undergone a procedure to have her tubes tied, which made those conversations about having a child together completely unrealistic right from the start. They also argued that Karina had no intention of abandoning her family or marrying Huston, and they emphasized that despite the affair and the offensive language contained in the messages, no one had actually ridden off into the sunset, so to speak, with anyone's life insurance money. In fact, they did note that much of that money remained set aside for the children. The defense acknowledged that once Ryan was killed, Karina may have found herself trapped in circumstances she couldn't control and far too deep to escape, but they insisted that being unfaithful didn't make her a murderer. Ultimately, they urged jurors to keep an open mind and return a verdict of not guilty. They argued that Karina was not Ryan's killer, but just another victim of Huston's manipulation.
As the trial drew to a close, jurors had heard weeks of testimony from investigators, forensic experts, digital analysts, family members, and Karina Cooper herself. But there were still several witnesses whose testimony helped paint a broader picture of what happened before and after Ryan Cooper's death. Deputy Travis Foster, one of the first officers involved in the case, testified about Karina's demeanor during the 911 call and immediately afterward. He told jurors that in all of his years in law enforcement, he had never seen a person's emotional state interfere so dramatically with their ability to communicate basic information. Ryan's brother, Aaron Cooper, also took the stand. He testified that after receiving Karina's frantic phone call that morning, he rushed to the family home where he found her sitting beside Ryan's blood-covered body. And one of the most poignant witnesses was Karina's own son, identified in court only by his initials, CC. He testified that in the days leading up to his father's murder, his mother had asked him to stop sleeping downstairs on the couch near Ryan, which was where he typically slept. Jurors also learned that during the 911 call itself, Karina had handed the phone to this child while she was speaking with dispatchers. Prosecutors argued that both of these details were significant. They said, if true, she's asking her son to stop sleeping downstairs, and that would suggest that there was this advanced planning, ensuring that he wasn't going to be around when Ryan was ultimately shot and killed. Ryan's sister, Michelle Cooper, offered another piece of testimony that prosecutors believed helped explain the state of Ryan and Karina's marriage before his death. Michelle told jurors that Karina had been removed from the family business phone plan in September of 2020, less than a year before Ryan was murdered. Then, while cleaning out the family farm office after Ryan's death, Michelle discovered paperwork that Ryan had apparently been reviewing. The documents contained Karina's phone records, and attached to it was a Post-it note with a handwritten name, Huston D. To prosecutors, this discovery suggested that Ryan may have already suspected there was something inappropriate happening between his wife and Huston Danker, and he had begun looking into it himself before he was killed. And we still have more to get into after one last break to hear a word from this week's sponsors. And now back to the episode.
Before the break, jurors heard Karina Cooper deny orchestrating her husband's murder and insisted that her relationship with Huston Danker was little more than just an online fantasy. And now, with the trial coming to an end, it's time to hear the final testimony and learn whether the jury believed her story. After hearing all the evidence, the case was finally placed in the jury's hands, and the deliberations didn't take very long. On July 11th, 2025, after approximately 3 hours, the jury returned with a verdict. Karina Cooper was found guilty of first-degree murder. The verdict represented a complete rejection of the defense's argument that Huston alone was responsible and that Karina had merely been manipulated by him. Instead, jurors accepted the prosecution's theory that she had participated in the plot to kill her husband. Karina later asked the court for a new trial, but that request was denied. At sentencing, the judge imposed the only punishment available under Iowa law for first-degree murder: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The judge described Ryan's killing as a senseless crime. He said that Ryan was a hardworking, kind, and generous man, and he also addressed Karina directly. Whether she had personally pulled the trigger or aided and abetted Huston Danker, the judge said that her actions had effectively robbed her own children of both their parents. Ryan was gone forever, and now their mother would be spending the rest of her life behind bars, which is something we always say in these cases when it's like a spouse is having like their children's parent murder. What do you think is going to happen?
And how do you not think this is a good possibility that this could happen?
Right.
This could be the outcome. They're dead. You're in jail, and your kids are going to hate you because you
this
killed
is the
their
most
father.
likely outcome,
Absolutely,
right? Like,
yeah.
If you're going to roll the dice and take your chances, like, you're really taking a gamble because, like, the chance of it going the other way, where you get away with this and you and your kids go off and live like a fantasy life with your new person, like, that is so. There's like almost a 0% chance of that happening.
I know.
So
Well, and
it's crazy.
on top of that, you're going to have to deal with the guilt. If you're a normal human of any kind, you're going to have to deal with the guilt of knowing when your kids are sad about their dad, all that stuff. You are the person that did that, which actually is why I think she put so much money in the kids, like their future. I think that was personally, I think that was her own way of being like, well, good came out of it. Like, I did do this good thing. But it's still batcrap crazy.
Absolutely. Ryan's family also spoke about the devastation the murder had left behind. His sister Michelle described Ryan as a man whose greatest source of pride wasn't farming or business, but being a father. She emphasized that 3 of his children had been asleep upstairs while their dad was murdered downstairs inside the family home, and she expressed anger that no effort had been made to protect them from the trauma they would carry for the rest of their lives. Ryan's sister-in-law, Heather, reflected on the permanent emotional damage caused by the crime. She spoke about worrying for the children's futures and mourning not only for Ryan himself, but also all the family memories that would never exist because of what had happened. Heather admitted that when the guilty verdict was announced, she didn't even feel relief. Instead, it just deepened the sadness of a family that had already been irreparably changed. In one of the most memorable statements delivered that day, she remarked that while Karina was now being sentenced by the court, Ryan had effectively been sentenced to death, and everyone who loved him had been sentenced to a lifetime without him. And no punishment could ever undo that loss.
And then, after Karina's trial had concluded, there was one final chapter that remained. Huston Danker had maintained his innocence after his own arrest in April of 2024, pleading not guilty and preparing for trial. His attorneys had even indicated that they intended to present an alibi defense, claiming that Huston had been at his parents' home when Ryan was killed, which is crazy because last time you said you were looking at farms and at your own home, and I feel like you would have figured that out years ago. But when August 12th, 2025 finally arrived, the very day that jury selection was set to begin, everything had changed. Rather than proceeding to trial, 27-year-old Huston unexpectedly pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. According to his attorney, Leon Spies, Huston admitted that he had assisted Karina in Ryan's murder. The plea was entered without an agreement from prosecutors. And his attorney said his client wanted to accept responsibility for his role in the killing and spare both his own family and the Cooper family from enduring another lengthy and painful trial. The decision obviously is a huge reversal. After years of him denying involvement and literally preparing to defend himself before a jury, Huston is now openly acknowledging that he participated in the conspiracy to kill Ryan Cooper. Assistant Tama County Attorney Geneva Williams later commented that while the guilty plea could never undo the devastation caused by Ryan's murder, she hoped it would provide at least some measure of justice and closure for his loved ones. And because Iowa law mandates life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder, Huston ended up receiving the same sentence as Karina. Today, Huston Danker, now 28 years old, is incarcerated at the Iowa State Penitentiary. Karina Cooper, now 49 years old, is serving her life sentence at the Iowa Correctional Institution for Women. Okay, so I watched parts of this trial, and Mandy, we've talked very recently even about how risky it is for a defendant to go on the stand themselves. Could not be more clear than this very case right here. She was so openly hostile to the prosecution. I'm not sure where the prosecutor was from, but he had a bit of an accent. And so every time he asked her a question, she would say, I don't understand you. I don't understand you. Like not even trying to kind of look likable to the jury. And the prosecutor was so calm with her and like would repeat things and was very respectful to her. But she came off as like the worst of the worst. So if you went into that hearing her talk and thinking, oh, this is this mom who's lost her husband or whatever, when you hear that, you're like, oh, this is a wicked person. This is a mean woman. So I don't know. That was just, it was very interesting and like shocking to watch it because like how your life is on the line and this is how you're going to act. That's crazy.
Yeah. There's so much about this story that I truly just do not understand. We were kind of talking a little bit beforehand that, you know, age gap relationships are one thing. Like that's not my place to judge, right? That's not my business. But in this case, when you have this woman who's like got an established family, she has kids, she's married, and she literally is 20 years older than you. Like that, I don't understand Houston's draw to this woman necessarily, you know, and what did he see? How did he see that a future even playing out really in that scenario? Just all of it, it just doesn't make any sense. And Karina herself as well. Like what were you thinking was actually going to come out of this? Like none of it makes any sense. It's all just so senseless. Like literally there's no other words for it. And I always just feel my heart always just breaks for the kids in these stories where
Huston had 2 kids himself. So like what a risk to do this. And now you've done that to your kids too. Like for what reason? There just truly is no a reason under the sun. But this one, it wasn't like we've seen those where they're like these passionate affairs and, you know, we have to be together and all this stuff. It was kind of like take it or leave it. It really just did not seem that serious. And you're like, really, you killed somebody. You killed somebody who you said you loved over this. This doesn't make any sense.
No, not at all. All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening to the episode this week. We will be back next week. Same time, same place, new story.
Have a great week.
Bye.